In this video, we introduce ClaySys AppForms for SharePoint and show you how to create a form that works with a contact list. And we will attach a data source to this form to read and write data to the contact list. We will now create a new list in the SharePoint site, and we will use the contact list template for this demo. And once we have created this contact list, the next step will be to replace the list view form with a form created using ClaySys. Next, we are going to go to the AppForms option in the site settings menu that will bring up the ClaySys AppForms designer user interface. And within the ClaySys AppForms designer, I have created a folder called contacts. And within this folder of contacts, I want to create a new form that I'm going to call the contact form. What you're seeing here is the design surface to design your form. And once I've given this form a name called contact form, the next step is to now use the different types of fields and labels that I need to create the required contact form. So I drag and drop from the toolbox the required control types or the field types to my form surface. And once I drag and drop the fields that I require, I can now set the properties of each control on this form the way I'd like it to render for the end users. So I'm going to call the first field the first name field, then I'll call the text box control the first name text box. And for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to call the second text box field there a full name field, and I will call its associated text box the full name text box. I am now going to skip to a point where I have dragged and dropped the additional fields required onto this form. These are all the additional text fields. And for the ID field, I'm going to make sure that I've just set a property saying it's enabled. And I can set basic validation rules for fields on the form by just using the properties. Like I'm saying that a specific field like the title is a required field, and I can update the message that I would like to pop up when that validation rule executes. I'm setting a similar validation rule for the first name field, saying that it is required or mandatory, and that is the relevant message that should pop up if that field is not filled in. Next, I'm going to just drag and drop a button onto this form, and I'm going to set the display name for the button to be a save button because the action I want for this button is when you click it, I want to save this form data to a target list in SharePoint. I'm similarly going to drag and drop another button, and I'm going to call the second button update, and this is for the purpose of updating the data in the list by using the form itself. And I can set the properties of the button as required. I'm now going to define the data source configuration. So I've selected data sources, and I'm going to opt for SharePoint because I want this form to connect with the SharePoint list. Once I've selected the SharePoint, I'm able to, in the existing site that I am in, I'm able to select the target list that I would like to configure this form to read and write to. And then I'm going to create a data source command called insert, which brings up all the columns or fields in that list. And we support IntelliSense for you to now map the form fields to the respective columns or fields in the list that you would like to save the data into when you click on the save button. So just like I've set an insert command, I'm now going to set an update command to map the same fields in the form with the query criteria to update the the correct record in that list or the correct row in that list when you make changes to any fields in the form and want to click the update button to edit those specific changes back to the list. I am also going to create a select command to allow you to update the ID field in the form and retrieve the matching row or record in the contact list. And once you've set up those three data source commands, you need to set the trigger in. So for example, I'm going to select the save button as the trigger to execute that insert command. And similarly, I'm going to set a rule that when you click on the update button, I need to execute the update command. And finally, I want to select records based on the ID field. So I'm going to say when the text ID field has been updated, then execute the select command. I will now go to the rules panel to create the business rules required for this form. And I'm going to call the first rule a rule on form load. And the purpose of this rule is to have the buttons disabled when I'm viewing a entry in that list. So what I do is I'm going to say that when the ID field is null or has no value, then I should not be displaying the relevant button. So the idea is I want to enable and disable the buttons on the form based on the value in the ID field. So I know if it is already displaying an existing record from the list, or if it is if it's a blank form that allows me to create a new entry into the list. So when I'm updating the business rules, what you're looking at here is the expression builder for me to create the business rules just by clicking on the options. And it takes a little time to understand how to navigate around the business rules expression builder. But once you have picked up the skills to work with expression builder, you are now able to embed any kind of business logic into the form. So I'm also going to set the required business logic to the update button. This is for the update button to be visible when I have a contact loaded in the form. So it allows me to make edits to it and click the update button. Now, I mean, the basic logic I'm configuring here is to just decide when I would like to have the save button enabled, which is when I'm making a new entry into the contact list. And then the update button should be enabled when I'm viewing an existing entry in the contact list, which would be based on a value in the ID field, because that ID field value is being created by the SharePoint list. So that defines when I would like to have my save button visible and my update button visible. So after setting this business logic for the buttons on the form, I mean, the last step here I'm just showing you is that I would like to have the update button disabled when I'm creating a new entry into the form, because at that stage I need to click on the save button. So once I check in the form, I have now associated the form with its data sources. I have set the insert and update commands to the form. I've set a select command to an entry typed into the ID field. And I have also set the business logic for displaying the update and save buttons. So I'm now going to show you that when you go back to the contact list in SharePoint, it displays the default SharePoint list form. Now, if I click on AppForms settings, I go into an option where I can change the configuration of the list form and associate it with a new contact form that I've created using AppForms. And I do this for the new item link in SharePoint against that list, as well as the edit item link in SharePoint for that list. And I'm going to load the same form because the form will enable and disable the update and save buttons as required. So now when I click add new item, you can see what shows up is the form that I've created using AppForms. And then once I type in the values required into the relevant fields, I'm just going to use John Smith as test data here for this entry. So working with the form, the experience is just like any web form. So I type in the value required to be updated into that contact list. I click the save button, and you can see that I have now an entry made into that contact list. If I want to edit this entry, I select the record and click edit item, and you can see it again loads the app form, but this time with the update button enabled. If I change the title to edit the title, it reflects. If I select the edit button again and I now make another edit to it and click on the update button, I'm updating the form again. So this is just an example of how, this is again showing you how the validation rules for the title field and the first name that I've set are being triggered when there are no values entered into it. And so with this video, we have shown you a simple scenario of creating forms using AppForms to replace the SharePoint list view forms. Thank you.